Welcome to the Atomic Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Osborn. And on this podcast, we interview successful business owners for them to share atomic, impactful lessons that they've learned throughout the course of their business, share them with us so that we can learn as well. As always, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way established businesses are creating a reliable acquisition channel of conversations with their ideal prospects. We use this method to book 26 qualified leads and sales calls in 10 days without any ad spend, outreach, endless social media posting, or any of those old, ineffective traditional marketing methods that everybody hates. To find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn. The link to that will be in the show notes below. But on today's show, our special guest is Charlie Redding. He's the owner of The Trusted Team, where he's helping professional service business owners double their business and time off. So, Charlie, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I want to start off with asking you a question that I always love starting off with, which is this. If you were able to go back to when you started your business, but knowing what you know now, what would you do differently in the first 12 months?
Well, firstly, Jason, thanks for inviting me on the podcast. It's great to be here. Looking forward to this conversation. And it's a great question to kick things off. I learned about maybe 5 years into my business journey, the power of reading. And now this is not going to be rocket science for a lot of people, but being somebody that was dyslexic, I always found that I was horribly slow at reading. And so therefore I might get through like a book a year as opposed to maybe two if I was really going at it. And then I discovered, and I can see all the amazing books behind you, I discovered the principle of audiobooks. And suddenly I went for, and it was really out of need. I joined a mastermind group. I was being told I've got to read a book by the next workshop. I was like, there's no way I can do that. So I've kind of, out of necessity, I found audiobooks. And I went from reading a book a year to a book a week. And then somebody along that journey, somebody said to me a quote from Jim Rohn, which is, if you want to be wealthy beyond your dreams, read a book a week. And by this point, I'd been doing this, and I'd seen exponential growth in my business, my life, everything. I was like, do you know what? That's the wisest words I've ever heard. So I would have introduced that to me earlier on my journey, because ultimately, like success leaves clues, doesn't it? And you might as well learn from somebody's like 20 plus years of experience and not make the same mistakes as them. So that really was the secret. Those words from Jim Rohn sum it up better than I ever could. So yeah, learning to read a book a week or listen to a book a week would probably be those words of advice.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I love about success principles is oftentimes the biggest pieces of advice for success are the simplest. They're almost too simple. People think, well, it's got to be more complicated than that. I mean, if it was that simple, everybody would do it, right? So, here's the question I have to you around that. With reading a book a week, did you go at it from the perspective of, okay, I want to listen to something or topics that I want to grow in? Or was it, okay, was it not that structured? It was like, I'm just going to start listening. Obviously, maybe you weren't listening to, you know, um, fictional type of books and stuff. I'm sure it was probably some sort of education of some sort. But did you have a structure around it, just so for people kind of going, okay, yeah, but how do you do that? Is it just a random thing? Where do I start? Like, what tips would you have around that?
Yeah, it was. To start with, it was, like I said, it was actually because I was being told I'd got to read this book this quarter by this mastermind group. And so, and what I found was then I started just picking up recommendations. Like, yes, that mastermind group would introduce me to one book, but actually it probably would mention another three or four. But always it was, so sometimes it was just picking out those books that sounded like they were going to help me. But then I learned to be much more strategic with it. And as you say, so for example, when I got into triathlon, and I really sort of fell into that sport by mistake. I bought a bike to try and sort my fitness out and signed up for a 100-mile bike ride because it would force me to use the bike. I was the only person that turned up on a mountain bike with a camelback on my back. Everyone else was on these really fast road bikes, but I managed to get through it. But I then fell into triathlon as a sort of stepping stone on from that. I was like, I have no clue about this sport. So I read every book I could find on triathlon, both everything from the beginner's guide to like Chrissy Wellington's book on being, multiple world champion, to the great stories of that sport like Iron War with Mark Allen and Dave Scott going into battle in Kona. I just consumed it. And as a result, I kind of learned so much about that sport and about the history of that sport and the kind of magic of that sport. And therefore I could embrace it much quicker than I would have done otherwise.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, man. It's again a simple question or that you answered on it, but it's one of those things we just often get stuck in. It's like, well, where do I start? How should I start reading the books? And I think what you said is actually correct. You just start. That's the big thing, and then you start figuring out the best ways to begin to add value to where your own journey is with everything.
Yeah.
So that's
And
that's brilliant.
and just on that note, so what I started to do, so I mean, I've read literally hundreds of business books or life development, personal development books. So what I then, people obviously often ask me, I talk a lot about the books I read. I help people, through those books, but also, so therefore people ask me about them. So what I ended up creating was what I called the Life Library. So basically anyone in, I can share the link in the show notes if that's useful. But anyone can go to that and go, well, I really need to improve this element of my business or my life. And there's all the books I've read there that I think are really worth reading. Some of which I can see on your shelf behind you, and then that guides them on that journey. So, like for example, if they know they need to improve like the innovation in their business, they need to innovate. I'm doing a session on that tomorrow. I'll give them like 5 books that they could go at, the best books on bringing innovation into your business. So yeah, that's something I can easily share. But that helps other people be strategic in that same way.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, as you've built up your business, one of the other questions I always love to ask is, what's one of the biggest things that you've done to build relationships with prospects to turning them into clients?
Oh wow, there's a lot, isn't there? So we um, uh, well, one of the things that we do, the 2 areas that spring to mind actually, because they serve most professional services businesses really, really well in marketing. And the first is what we call the referral revolution. Because if you can take on one client, if that client always, if every client you take on introduces you to another client, then if you get that right, you almost don't need another marketing strategy ever.
Hmm. Yeah.
And in fact, I am the host of a podcast called The Business of Endurance, and we've interviewed over 150 of the top professional athletes, all those amazing people I mentioned in terms of like Chrissy Wellington, Mark Allen, but like 150 of them, the top pros, top coaches, top adventurers. And all I did was cold approach 5, and pretty much every one of the 145 was introduced to me off those first 5. So if you get the referral revolution right, that is like magic in a professional services firm. But then the other one, which we call the partnership playbook, is going out and finding other firms that share your ideal clients that aren't in competition with you. So my biggest business, I've founded 6 businesses, sold 4. The biggest one of those exits was a financial planning firm, became one of the top financial planning practices in the UK. And we would work very closely with firms of accountants, firms of solicitors, because we knew they they housed all of our ideal clients, but they weren't in competition. So we'd spend lots of time adding value to their process, hanging out with them. We had a whole structure, which we now called the partnership playbook, to make sure that we could get as many introductions out of them as was possible. So to be honest, most professional services firms, if they get those 2 channels right, they don't need that much else.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I love how simple it is as well. Like if you focus on those 2 things over time, it can greatly expand in what you're doing for your reach. I love that. I love that. Changing course a little bit. One of the other questions I love to ask, Charlie, is around challenges in business, because as we all know, as a business owner, no matter if it's a solopreneur or big massive business, it can be lonely sometimes. We can feel like we've made am I the only one that makes these mistakes? And obviously, you've built and sold multiple businesses, so I'm sure you've gone through iterations of this many times. And so I like to help people just realize we all go through stuff. And so, what's one of the biggest business challenges that you faced? And it can be in any area, but what's one of the biggest business challenges that you faced? And what's the lesson that you learned from that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've been in business over 25 years. So there's been plenty. Um, I think there's probably three phases of the challenge. Because I always talk about trying to build a saleable or scalable business, which we also nickname the self-driving business. And really, but all of the six businesses I founded have kind of gone through three big challenge stages. And the first is finding clients and finding enough of your ideal clients and essentially building what we ended up calling the automated marketing machine. So having like, because the founder often is the bottleneck in terms of finding those clients. And so therefore you need to build out that automated marketing machine. So that's kind of phase one, and people usually eventually work that out and they have a business that generates those clients one way or another. And then the problem is they get really busy, they get successful, but they get really busy and their work-life balance goes to pieces. And I've had that. I've been that bottleneck in the business again, where I'm working every hour God sends. And I went from that to taking 3 months of every year off. So it's absolutely possible. And I've done that for over a decade. And it's absolutely possible to have a business that's growing by 50% year on year, but you're having 3 months of every year off. So that's probably the toughest challenge number two. And then finally, it's building the business so that it grows whether you're there or not. Driven by a leadership team, whether you're there or not, you're the ideas person, but everyone else is actioning everything. And that's where you have a self-driving business. And that's where it's truly saleable or scalable. That's where it becomes its most valuable because you can sell it and it doesn't make any difference whether you're there or not.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. Well, looking over the next 2 to 3 years, what's your goals with your business? What would you like to achieve?
So we at the moment, so the Trusted Team is a relatively new business to me, and I mean that in the sense that we've been running that business 3 years as opposed to the sort of 20 odd years. And it's a business I set up after I exited Efficient Portfolio, my financial planning business. Um, so at the moment, it's very much mastermind focused. We do a mastermind in London every 2 months, and then we do some online coaching in between that and as a separate thing for people that are trying to get up to the level of the mastermind. Um, but I am very conscious that we need to massively up our game in terms of helping people, because the way that we currently do this, we can't help loads of people because it's restricted by the geographical boundaries. Um, and so therefore, my goal is to help 1 million entrepreneurs double their time off as well as doubling their business. And to do that, we have to change the dynamics completely. So we're in the process of building an app that we think is the key to unlocking that, and then there'll be some further progress that needs to lead out of the back of that. But that'll kind of help them bring daily learning to their routine as a business owner, but also it'll help them set the goals that are important to them, and then it'll help them manage the actions and the habits that ultimately will drive the achievement of those goals. And that's called the
Yeah.
Next Life Planner. It's not out today. We launched the beta test today, I think, actually, yeah. But it will be out, and so I can obviously share that with you when it's up and running.
That's awesome. No, that's really, really cool. That's exciting. Well, congratulations for getting the beta test out today, man. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice, nice. Well, Charles, for people that are looking to learn a little bit more about you and how to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way to find us is at thetrusted.team. So www.thetrusted.team. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook if that's what you prefer. But probably the best place to find out about all of what we do. And on that website, there are a number of different events that we run at any one time that people can kind of dive into to find out more about how we help business owners through the Trusted Team.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I definitely recommend everyone checking that out. Charlie, thank you so much for being on the show today and just sharing your wisdom and experience through multiple businesses that you have run. And I just greatly appreciate your time on the show today. So thank you for that. And as a reminder for everyone listening, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method. The new way established businesses are creating a reliable acquisition channel of conversations with their ideal prospects that doesn't rely on any of the old, ineffective, traditional marketing methods that everybody hates. To find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn on LinkedIn. The link to that will be in the show notes below. And until next episode, stay inspired.